Hello everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Je m'appelle Guillaume Saint-Pierre. Je vais être votre modérateur. So we will start with statements for about 20 minutes, starting with Minister Guilbeault, and then Parliamentary Secretary Adam van Koeverden, and then Senator Stan Kutcher will be speaking. And then we will go to questions. Minister.
Merci beaucoup, Guillaume. Thank you, everyone. Bonjour. Merci d'être ici et de vous joindre à nous en personne ou virtuellement. Je tiens d'abord à reconnaître que nous sommes ici réunis sur le territoire ancestral non cédé du peuple algonquin-anishinaabe. Je remercie les générations qui ont pris soin de ces terres depuis des temps immémoriaux. It has been a long time coming, and it has taken a lot of work by many parliamentarians from environment committees in the House of Commons as well as in the Senate. I want to take the time to thank Senator Kutcher for being such an amazing sponsor in the Senate for this bill and ensuring the passage of this bill through the Senate. I also want to thank and congratulate my colleague, Parliamentary Secretary Terry Dogood, who has done incredible work to enable us to be where we are today. So last night, Bill S5 received royal assent. That takes a major step forward for the health and the environment of Canadians. The Strengthening Environmental Protection for a Healthier Canada Act is now law. Canada's cornerstone environmental law has not been significantly reformed in more than 20 years. The world has changed since then. Our scientific knowledge and understanding has progressed, and it was past time for the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, 1999, known as CEPA, to be modernized, to provide more comprehensive protection for Canadians and their environment from pollution. While the basic architecture of CEPA remains fundamentally sound and continues to provide a robust basis for many of the government's pollution prevention programs, science has moved forward tremendously in the past 24 years. The importance of protecting our environment is top of mind, and the connection between a healthy environment and our own health and well-being is now well recognized. With this act, we've modernized CEPA to strengthen the management of chemicals, improving how chemicals and other substances are assessed and managed. And we've made changes to ensure that we have the best possible tools to protect the health of Canadians and their environment from a wide range of pollutants in addition to chemicals. We're also accelerating efforts to replace, reduce, and refine animal testing. Cette loi prévoit également, pour la toute première fois, l'obligation de tenir compte du droit de tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes à un environnement sain lors de la prise de décision en vertu de la Loi canadienne sur la protection de l'environnement. Car tout le monde, peu importe où il vit, mérite de vivre dans un environnement propre, sain et durable. Et en particulier les populations vulnérables, comme nos enfants, nos petits-enfants, nos parents et nos grands-parents. Les personnes les plus susceptibles d'être affectées par une exposition à la pollution. Sans oublier évidemment les personnes qui vivent dans des collectivités où l'exposition est plus élevée. Pour que cela puisse se concrétiser, les modifications comportent également une exigence relative à la réalisation de recherches, d'études et d'activités de surveillance qui éclaireront les décisions pour protéger ce droit. And now, with the modernized Act in force, we can get on with important work of implementation. We will be working with Canadians to develop a plan of chemicals management priorities and collaborating on an implementation framework on the right to a healthy environment. The right to a healthy environment is a new concept in law in Canada. We look forward to working with Canadians to develop a framework that explains how principles of environmental justice and intergenerational equity will be considered when making decisions under this Act. Maintenant que la loi est en vigueur, nous avons franchi une étape importante de la modernisation de la loi canadienne sur la protection de l'environnement. Mais ce n'est pas la dernière étape. Nous continuerons de travailler à de nouvelles modifications à cette loi. La compréhension scientifique des polluants ne s'arrête pas là, et nous non plus. Pour que toute la population canadienne obtienne ce qu'elle mérite et ce qu'elle attend, un environnement propre, sain et durable. Merci. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le ministre. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Merci d'être ici ensemble pour cette très important annoncement aujourd'hui. Comme l'a expliqué mon collègue Steven Guilbeault, le projet de loi S5 reconnaît que chaque personne au Canada a le droit de vivre dans un environnement sain. et le gouvernement canadien a le devoir de protéger ses droits dans l'application de la loi canadienne sur la protection de l'environnement. Il s'agit d'un pas important pour le Canada. Nous affirmons avec la conviction qu'un environnement sain est crucial pour la santé et le développement d'êtres humains. 80% of health problems are caused by external factors, such as our lifestyles, the environment that we live in, and the health of our communities. They are all interrelated. Bill S5 will better protect people and the environment by strengthening the foundation for assessing and managing risks related to exposures to chemicals and animate products of biotechnology. The Canadian Environmental Protection Act, one of Canada's most important pieces of environmental legislation, came into force in 2000. As you know, CEPA and the Chemicals Management Plan have provided the foundation for a robust, coordinated approach to environmental and health protection in Canada. Both have successfully reduced risks to people in Canada and the environment from exposure to harmful chemicals and animate products of biotechnology. Much has changed over the past 2 decades, though. In fact, last week we witnessed the devastating impacts of wildfires across the country. The updated legislation in Bill S5, which received royal assent yesterday, reflects our evolving understanding of 21st century science. As you have heard, Bill S5 requires that decisions made under CEPA respect the individual's right to a healthy environment, and that means everyone. In modernizing CEPA, the government will be better able to protect Indigenous peoples and vulnerable populations from harmful chemicals by adding to CEPA a duty to protect Canadians' right to a healthy environment and to uphold related principles, such as environmental justice, non-regression, and intergenerational equity. Amendments to CEPA create a stronger regime for controlling the subset of toxic substances that pose the highest risk to environmental health and the environment. In order to support the shift to safer chemicals, the government recognizes that it is important to encourage the use of product designs, processes, and chemicals that are safe for the environment and human health. Finally, in modernizing CEPA, the government makes clear its commitment to reduce its reliance on vertebrate animal testing. Investments in new alternatives and approaches are key to this reduction. The government is taking action under CEPA to replace, reduce, or refine the use of vertebrate animal testing to the extent practical when assessing the risks that substances may pose to human health and the environment. In addition, the Food and Drugs Act was also amended to incorporate an environmental purpose so that environmental risks resulting from drugs can be managed. CEPA is key to the health protection of Canadians, and Bill S5 represents the first set of comprehensive amendments to CEPA since it was enacted over 20 years ago. With this bill coming into force, the Government of Canada recognizes that every individual in Canada has a right to a healthy environment under the authorities of CEPA. It's now my pleasure to introduce Senator Stan Kutcher.
Thank you very much. Bienvenue à tous. I will focus on 3 things. First of all, it's a privilege to have been the Senate sponsor of this really groundbreaking bill, which signals a paradigm shift in Canadians thinking about environment and Canadians acting on a healthy environment. The bill brings into play environment, a healthy environment as a human right, and that is just a huge step. I can't underline how important a step that is conceptually, that will help direct how we think about our environment from not just now, but for decades to come. As part of that, it identifies vulnerable populations, and we in Canada have too long ignored the importance of vulnerable populations and have too long let the difficulties that vulnerable populations experience be ignored. So this bill identifies that need, and thank you for that. It also looks at cumulative effects of toxins on human health, which is a major, major step forward, and it actually decreases our reliance on animal testing, another huge step forward. The second thing on this is I think that this bill shows how well the House and the Senate can work together. The bill did start in the Senate. Minister, you remember we had over 70 amendments to the bill. Well, that's what we're supposed to do, make your legislation better. But you did, and I think this is fantastic. The House actually kept most of them. It improved some of the amendments that we thought we'd done a great job on, but the House actually made them better, and thank you for that, and added amendments of its own. So I think by the time that this bill passed through this crucible of House and Senate, it was a better piece of legislation, and I'm very pleased to have been part of that process, and I think the House and the Senate really seized this issue. Then the final thing that I would like to comment on is we've heard that science has changed, and because of scientific changes, we've been able to move this bill ahead. But I also want to identify that this bill has an opportunity to change science in Canada, specifically environmental science. Because the bill requires us to up our game in that area. We need effective biobanks. We need longitudinal, long-term studies through the reproductive ages of the impact of chemicals on human health. We require the ability to measure the impact of toxic environments on genes, the gene-environment interaction that you so eloquently mentioned. So toxicogenomics is a burgeoning field. So it is an incredible opportunity for policy to drive science, because science has driven the policy. So it's to me, as a scientist, it's a wonderful example of how well this works together. And I'm actually very proud to have been the Senate sponsor of this bill, and look forward to it and other legislation coming which will promote a healthy environment for all Canadians.
Okay, so we will now move to questions. Les gens qui sont sur Zoom peuvent signifier leur intérêt à poser une question en utilisant la fonction lever la main. So we will start with Davis Legree, iPolitics.
Hi, Mr. Guilbeault, just a question about, did the federal government ever consider opening up Section 22 of CEPA that would allow for the enforceability to be improved for some of the changes made in Bill S5?
So thank you for the question. As I said in my remarks, for me and for us as a government, this is not the end of the reforms we want to bring to CEPA. As a legislator, the challenge that you have when you're faced with a bill that hasn't been updated in over 20 years is, do you try and do everything at once, or do you take it bite-size? And in a minority government, we thought that the better approach would be to choose a certain number of important issues, and Senator very eloquently, and Adam as well, spoke about many of them. But we understand that there are other changes that should happen on CEPA, and we've already started working with the department on tabling a new bill that could tackle other changes that are required. Now, that work has recently started, so I can't get into any details because I have none to provide. But we definitely want to propose more amendments to CEPA.
And, you know, a series of amendments were proposed by the Bloc and NDP at the committee stage, many of which were rejected by the Liberals and the Conservatives. Do you believe this bill is as strong as it possibly could have been?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that the senator described very well the process we started in the Senate. There were many amendments, dozens and dozens of amendments that were brought into the Senate. We kept a lot of them in the House. New amendments were brought in the House as well. So I think we have a very good bill, and it's not because we disagreed with the Bloc or the NDP on some of those amendments that we disagreed overall with the work we were doing together. And I think in committee we worked very well with all of the parties, interestingly enough. I mean, despite the fact that the Conservatives in the end decided to vote against it. In committee, they were mostly helpful.
Mary Wolf, Globe and Mail.
Yeah, hi. You mentioned protection from, as you put it, animate products of biotechnology. Is that GM, genetically modified animals, fish, insects you're talking about? And can you go into some detail about what extra protections will be offered by this bill?
Well, thank you. I won't get into the technical descriptions of some of the language used. I'd have to consult with experts. I'm not an expert. I'm proud of this bill, and I'm proud of the progress. As I described, 80% of our health problems as human beings are impacted by our environment that we live in, and that includes really everything from the chemicals around us, indeed genetically modified products, my own family life, my dad has a neurodegenerative disorder, which was definitely brought on by an environmental exposure to harmful products, and that's what we're trying to protect against it for future generations. So I would leave it to a scientist, perhaps the senator, to describe what an animate biotechnological product might be. But I'm proud of this legislation today, and I'm proud to support it.
If I may add, I think that what this bill really does is to reinforce the role of science in policy development in Canada. And as Senator Kutcher said, also how policy will help drive more scientific research on environmental impact of chemicals, amongst other things. So I think that it is a significant step in the right direction to protect the health and safety of our environment, and as well as Canadians.
Just as a follow-up on that, there are some environmental groups today expressed disappointment that there isn't more protection, for example, on genetically modified salmon, stopping them escape, that kind of thing, and also on labelling. I know that labelling is one of the issues that is looked at, and I wondered why that wasn't included in the bill.
I think we have provided, or we will be providing you with a list of quotes from a number of environmental organizations, animal rights organizations, even industry organizations that have applauded the passing of S5. So I'm not saying that the bill is perfect. I'm not saying that there's not more work to be done, but I could quote you environmental defense. After more than a decade of advocacy, Canada's cornerstone toxic law will soon have new transparency and accountability tools to better protect us from hazardous substances. And as Environment Minister, there aren't many days in a year where you please everyone from environmental defense to the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada, which said, and I quote, CIAC is glad to see that CEPA 2023 preserves the risk and science-based approach at the heart of the Act. So, yes, some would have wanted more, but there are a lot of people who are very happy with what we've been able to achieve.
Matteo Cimellaro, National Observer.
Thank you. I'm curious about the right to healthy environment and the language around vulnerable populations. If UNDRIP is baked into if the language of UNDRIP baked into this bill, I'm wondering how it might affect those sacrifice zones or frontline communities that had no consultation processes. I'm thinking of Omnijong First Nation or Fort Chipewyan. I'm wondering how that might play out now if UNDRIP is now enacted in a bill like this, particularly when there's been some bad faith actions from industry recently with the tailing ponds or the ongoing issues in Chemical Valley.
Thank you for the question. I think that you see in the Act now a deliberate effort to focus our attention and scientific research on vulnerable communities. You described some of the things, some of the wrongs we've done in the past, and I think what we're trying to do with this bill is to do much better going forward. You talked about the tailing ponds. As you know, we've set up a working group composed of a number of Indigenous nations from Alberta, as well as the Northwest Territories, the government of the Northwest Territories, Alberta, the federal government, to find a better way of moving forward. As far as the federal government is concerned, we have a interdepartmental working group on tailing ponds. I've been working on oil sands issues for almost 3 decades, and I've never seen that type of involvement from the federal government. It's health, it's Natural Resources Canada, it's Indigenous Services, Crown Indigenous Relations, Transport, Environment and Climate Change Canada. So I think we are trying to build new foundations for our relationship with Indigenous peoples through this bill, as we are through a number of other bill and act that the government is posing.
Yeah, could you just walk me through a little bit? I know you mentioned some working groups. I know the action plan is still 2 years away for this bill itself. I'm just wondering about mechanisms that would kind of police or enforce this bill for industry, in terms of the consultation process or any any kind of leaks. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Well, now that the act has passed, we will work with provinces and territories, Indigenous nations, stakeholders, to define exactly how do we operationalize that new right that we've created in Canadian law. So I can't give you an answer now, but we will be working in the coming months to define that very question you posed.
Sarah Ritchie, CP.
Senator, just given where you and I both come from, the first thing that I thought of when I read about this bill was Boat Harbor. And so I'm thinking about communities like that, similar to my colleague, which have been greatly impacted over the years. How do you envision this law changing things going forward? Is this going to be something that allows for retroactive compensation? Do you think this is part of what needs to happen?
That question, and thank you for raising that important issue. I think as I understand the bill, what it does is provides a vehicle to redress and address some of those particular issues. I'm not in the government. I'm an independent senator, so I can't answer parts of your question. But I do want you to know that the issues in and around UNDRIP were very, very top of mind. And if you look at some of the amendments, Senator Arnott made a profound amendment focusing on this. Senator Mary Jane McCallum had major input into amendments, and a number of the senators around the table are very, very aware of these issues. And our hope is that this provides a framework that the government can then work from to create the regulations, to create the enforcement, to create the authorities to actually deal with these issues in a proactive way.
And Minister, I know there's been talk in the past about the amount of time that it'll take to create the definition that's required. And the criticism, I guess, has been that this definition already exists elsewhere and that Canada could move a little bit faster than the 2 years that you've set out. So I just want your response to that criticism.
It's always a bit challenging as a lawmaker, because there is this idea that, if something exists somewhere else, you can just take it and implement it in your own country. And obviously, all countries are different. They have different laws, regulations, history in terms of implementation. Our relationship with Indigenous peoples is not unique, but you don't find that everywhere around the world. The nature of our federation, the role of provinces and territories. So I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to provide you with excuses as to why it could take up to 2 years. If we can do it faster, we will do it faster. If you talk to my colleagues, they'll tell you that patience is not one of my great virtue. We don't have a lot of time to tackle many of these things, whether it's chemical pollution and its impact on human health and on the environment, whether it's climate change, whether it's nature degradation. And I think if you look at what we've been doing over the last year and a half in terms of policies, regulations, investment, it is unseen in our history. We have, in the course of the last year, we've either adopted or are in the process of adopting 5 or 6 different pieces of regulations, cap on oil and gas emissions, new methane regulations, zero emission vehicles, clean fuel regulations, net zero electricity grid by 2035. Plus this, we have other bills coming as well. So there are no shortcuts to doing this, but we can try and work as fast as we can. So the 2 year time limit is not. We don't have to take 2 years, and if we can do it faster, but we need to take some time to figure out how can we implement this in in a thoughtful, meaningful way as part of our bodies of laws and regulations.
Carl Duggan, Politico.
Hi, I'd just like to know, and follow up on that last point, how long will it take before Canadians start feeling some of the protections from the legislation?
Well, I mean, I would argue that the fact that the bill has now received royal assent sends a powerful message to provinces and territories, to industry, and to Canadians, generally speaking, that this will become a cornerstone of our major environmental legislation. Obviously, I think Canadians will see more benefits when we are able to fully implement it. But I think just the fact that the act has been adopted, the bill has been adopted and is now an act, sends a powerful message that there's a new way of doing things in Canada.
And just to quickly follow up, to what extent will this affect PFAS chemicals? I haven't been able to follow the entire process of the bill making through Parliament. So.
Well, I think like many other chemicals that we are managing or trying to manage under CEPA, it will ensure that the decisions we take on substances like these or others are rooted in the best scientific evidence. And the Act forces us to seek out more and better science, as the Senator was saying, and he can say it much more eloquently than I can. He's a scientist, I'm not. But I think that's really what we're doing. We're forcing us as government and future governments to ensure that we do a better job when it comes to management of chemicals and their impacts on human health and the environment.
Is there any other question? I think Davis, you had one last question.
Yeah, if I can ask one more. I was just wondering, what does it say about Bill S5 that Elizabeth May, one of the country's most notable environmentalists, was not willing to vote for it? Does that concern you, or that does it say that Bill S5 is not taking a large enough step?
I've known Elizabeth for decades. I have a lot of respect and affection for her. I think our approach to change is different. If it's not perfect, Elizabeth won't support it. Unfortunately, in this world, things are rarely perfect, and we do our best. We work really hard. With allies, with people from environmental organizations, scientists, industry, obviously parliamentarians, to do this. So I listed some of the support we got: the David Suzuki Foundation, animal rights organizations, who have applauded the passing of this bill. So I really think it's a different way of viewing how change happen in our society. But I will continue to have tremendous respect and affection for Elizabeth, but I profoundly disagree with her in terms of how we make change happen in our country.
Alors, c'est ce qui met fin à notre conférence de presse aujourd'hui. Il n'y a personne qui a d'autres questions. Alors, merci tout le monde. Thank you, everyone.